Welcome to Green Building Matters, the original and most popular podcast focused on the green building movement. Your host is Charlie Cicchetti, one of the most credentialed experts in the green building industry and one of the few to be honored as a LEED Fellow. Each week, Charlie welcomes a green building professional from around the globe to share their war stories, career advice, and unique insight into how sustainability is shaping the built environment. So settle in, grab a fresh cup of coffee, and get ready to find out why green building matters.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. Once a week, I get to interview a green building professional somewhere in the world. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, and so is my guest today, Ramana Koti. Ramana, how you doing today?
Excellent, Charlie. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I know we know each other in some circles here in Atlanta, sustainability and design, and some ties back to Georgia Tech or in our LEED Fellow group, which I know we'll get to, but you got into the club in 2019. I know today you're the Sustainable Design Leader and Vice President there at HKS, based here in Atlanta, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But I like to ask all of my guests, take us back so we kind of have that origin story. Where did you grow up and go to school?
Yeah, I was born in an Indian state called Andhra Pradesh, and that's where I did all my schooling. And I studied a Bachelor's of Architecture in the state university there, which is Andhra University, graduating in 2000. And then spent a few years working, but again, went to grad school at Arizona State University in the US here, studying Master of Science in High Performance Buildings.
Those are great schools. Did you know you always want to be an architect? Like, where did you get that influence?
I can't say that I did. I had an artistic streak in me, I would say. I doodle really well, color really well. But, in India, the way it worked was you take a competitive entrance exam and people, based on how well they score, they take up things. And based on how I scored architecture. So it was a happy coincidence in a way.
Yeah, look at you now, man. Thanks for telling us that. I like to follow up because this is the Green Building Matters podcast. When did sustainability, Ramana, start showing up for you?
It's hard to put a finger on that. I mean, the way we were brought up in India, power was rationed, water was rationed. There were times when we didn't have water for days, so I had to go use a hand pump in a neighbor's house, carry water back. So and we got a good scolding if we didn't turn off the light after exiting our room. So it was built in our lifestyle in a way, but when we were studying architecture, I think the subject climatology sort of helped crystallize the whole view around sustainability. I would say how different areas respond differently in terms of architecture.
Just that early resourcefulness. Okay, so start connecting the dots on the career. You've got your master's then at Arizona State, and then, what were you doing early in your career after that?
So I like I mentioned, I did work for 4 years in India between my undergrad and grad school, and I had a great opportunity to work with some of the leaders in the Indian industry. Specifically, Neeraj Manchanda is an architect in Delhi. A very inspiring approach to aesthetics, materials, and architecture. And the next boss was Ajay Chaudhary. And then a kind of a modern architect. He's no more, but again, very inspiring design. So the inspiration from there. And after my master's, I had the good fortune, to interview with BNIM and start working there. And I felt like that just gave me the right start and momentum in the green building industry.
I love that. Well, it sounds like you worked with some great mentors there in India, then got the master's, and you've worked with some really great design firms. So we'll have to get to that. Any other mentors, though, I just brought that up that you want to give a shout out to? Maybe, some mentors to me, someone that influences you, but you may not meet, or some, no, they literally open some doors for you. Anyone else that kind of you would call a mentor?
Yeah, a few names come to mind. In the town I lived in, Visakhapatnam, there was an architect named Madras Srinivasan who kind of trained me to take the architectural entrance test. He will always be fondly remembered. and one of our professors, Shabnam Patel, who taught us design. And then an American architect who practiced in India, his name is Joseph Allen Stein, comes to mind. Especially, I visited a few of his projects when I worked in Delhi. And what's inspiring about Joseph Allen Stein was that he would not start designing the building without involving a landscape architect.
Okay.
And at that moment, all the architects I saw, they would design the building first and let the landscape architect do the landscape around. But I felt that was very inspiring. And I think his focus was mainly architecture, light, and landscape kind of blended into each other. I found that truly inspiring.
Thank you for sharing that. What great mentors you've had along the way. So let's talk a little more about the career timeline. So you're at a few very large firms. So can you talk about what were some of those early sustainability or LEED projects maybe? Was sustainability in lots of projects or no, you really had to fight for it? Tell us about those early days when you first got exposed to, say, LEED.
Yeah. So Professor Harvey Bryan taught us a course on LEED during our master's program. And most of us, I would say all of us, took the LEED exam while we were still in grad school and became LEED APs. So our resumes were well prepared for job applications by the time we were graduating. But then I think one of the memorable things that comes to mind while I was at BNIM was the entire town of Greensburg, Kansas was wiped out by a tornado in 2007. And the city made a resolution of building the LEED Platinum standards and doing renewable energy and whatnot. And BNIM got the project, and I had the good fortune of working on a few projects in that town. And we helped design a school there, and several other projects. And there was another project up in Rhinebeck, New York, which is the Omega Center for Sustainable Living, which was both LEED and Living Building Challenge.
Oh, wow.
And one thing I really like to brag about was Jason McLennan interviewed me and selected me for the...
That's amazing.
Yeah. And 3 months after I started, he was leaving BNIM to set up ILFI and Living Building Challenge. So I was bummed about that, but it was a truly amazing experience. The initiation into LEED and Living Building Challenge there.
For those listening that don't know, take a look, of course, at the Living Building Challenge and ILFI, what Jason had gone over and helped build out. And now there's some amazing living buildings, right? It's one thing for LEED Platinum, net zero, net positive, regenerative design. So I think you've got a nice balance. You get to work on not just some advanced green buildings, but some really advanced, even regenerative buildings. So we'll have to talk about that more. As I understand it, then you ended up for many years at Lord X Sargent, came to Atlanta. So tell us about that time. It's been 6 or 7 months since I left Lord X Sargent, but I feel like a teenager who's just left his house. In many ways, my heart is still there. Sure.
But I think higher education is the mainstay at Lord X Sargent, or was. And I think the way universities, do their homework and come up with their own sustainability standards and a minimum of LEED Gold, LEED Silver, whatnot. It's a very methodical approach, and you kind of get the requirements from the owner. You're not trying to sell LEED or sustainability to the owner, which helps which acts as a forcing function in a way for sustainability. So 10 years of that, working with great people like Jim Niccolo, Joshua Gassman, and getting to the point where about 10 years experience as a LEED AP, and I could apply to become a LEED fellow.
Yeah, and you got it there in 2019. So just congrats on that and all the amazing higher ed and green building work you did there at LAS. And then, like you said, after almost 12 years there, now you're at HKS and still doing all things sustainability. So maybe in just a minute, I want you to kind of tell us what's your responsibility today. But one more look back. I like to give permission to my podcast guests. What are some of your proudest achievements?
Yeah, I mentioned Lord X Sargent, and in the same vein, I would say just being a team member on the Candida building for innovative sustainable design, I think that's right there at the top. I can't imagine anything more humbling than that. And one other thing that comes to mind is my master's thesis, which was kind of a happy coincidence. It took two different software, one that does energy modeling, but kind of does daylight analysis more roughly, and then fed it the results of a more detailed daylight analysis software and said, what are the differences in decision making based on your own analysis versus looking at more detailed analysis? I think that helped push the industry tools in a certain direction, I would say.
Oh, that's fantastic. I know you mentioned the lead fellow. For those that don't know, and we've had Sean Aurora on, we've had some folks from Skanska. It's great to talk to someone that was on the design side of the Candida building. Arguably, right, one of the greenest buildings in the world right there on the Georgia Tech campus. So, but yeah, what else? Anything else stand out as you look back? Any other really cool project?
I would say more than projects, I would say my community engagement through writing, volunteering, and teaching has been also very, I'm proud of those accomplishments in a way. And kind of not only doing the work, but helps spread the word and make it available like you're doing with the podcasts, right?
Yeah. No, the message of my podcast is teach everything you know. So I can tell you love doing that too.
Yeah. And then one last thing I would mention is in 2007, while I was living in Kansas City, there was a competition called Sustainable Kansas City, and everybody was welcome to provide entries, not just architects, on ideas that would make Kansas City more sustainable. And me and a few others presented 2 ideas, and both of them made it to the top 25. So I'm very proud of that.
Congratulations. That's a big deal. Yeah. So we look back, where'd you come from? How'd you get into sustainability? We talked about some accomplishments and mentors. So now let's talk about kind of present day. So what excited you about hopping over to HKS last year? Some of your role, what kind of keeps you busy today? So for those that don't know, tell us more about HKS and a little more about your role.
Okay. HKS is an international architecture firm with about 1,600 people with multiple practice areas like commercial mixed use, hospitality, healthcare, aviation, so on and so forth, interiors. And I am the sustainable design leader for the commercial mixed use practice, which has several building types like multifamily, retail, hotels, office, and a lot of times all of them mixed in one project. And my role is to start the projects off on a right footing. Help us get the right kind of work and start the projects off on the right footing, and do periodic check-ins to make sure the initial goals and strategies are being implemented, and put a bow on the certification efforts at the end and get the targeted certification levels. And I report to our Chief Sustainability Officer, Rand Ekman. So, and I'm not limited to the commercial mixed use practice area by any means. I'm right now helping on a master planning project by our cities and communities practice also.
That's great. A lot of different rating systems, still a lot of LEED work, it sounds like. That's a very large architecture firm. So do you have like sustainability team members scattered at various offices, and you share best practices? Like how do you share, say, LEED best practices amongst a large team? Any pro tips there?
We have a virtual team called Design Green. In terms of billability and the financials, we are in the buckets of the formal practice areas. But we are a virtual green team comprised of about 12 individuals who do energy analysis, life cycle analysis, and sustainability certifications and whatnot. So we meet twice a week and talk about project work, talk about industry initiatives, talk about firm initiatives, and share not only workload but inspiration to keep us moving forward.
I love it because it's ever changing. We've got LEED, of course, fit well, and you've got some living building projects. It's, it's fascinating what's going on in the green building movement. And that's a good segue to my next favorite question, which is, okay, you're a green building guru, right? And I'm kind of curious, what are you excited about? What's coming down the road? If you had a crystal ball, what's next?
I feel like health and decarbonization are already here as design influencers, although in terms of, compared to what we can do, I think we're only scratching the surface at this point. So I'm really excited to see how incentives from the Inflation Reduction Act will generally put us on a broader path to decarbonization and also make buildings much more greener than they are. And also, given the focus and all the buzz about artificial intelligence and going on right now, I'm just interested in seeing if we can leverage artificial intelligence to be more efficient with green buildings than we currently are. That's an exciting prospect.
Very exciting. We see some new tools like ChatGPT, but there's maybe some construction documents, maybe parts of it can be big data and kind of automate a little so that architects can focus on what they're, really needing to focus on, right? Just instead of the smaller task, hey, let's focus on these bigger problem-solving things. And so it's going to be fascinating. I think we all need to embrace it. Frankly, some business models might need to adjust a little bit,
Yeah.
As they say, what got us here won't get us there. Anything else kind of about the future of green or healthy buildings you want to add?
No, I just the confluence of health and decarbonization. I think it's pretty exciting. I mean, all electric buildings and, as the grid becomes greener, buildings automatically become greener. You don't have to do anything to existing buildings, right?
We've got to get ready for those renewables coming to our building in the form of electricity, right? Some don't understand why all electric. I know some of your work is also in timber frame structures and probably embodied carbon. So how are you coaching your team on embodied carbon right now?
I think just quantifying where you are is a great step. And that's what we've been doing on select projects the last 5 years or so. But just yesterday, we got a proposal okayed for doing a full life cycle analysis on 2 large projects for a confidential client. And there is real interest in actually going beyond quantifying where the embodied carbon footprint falls and looking at design options like concrete mixes and, insulation types and drywall types to see how much we can actually, not just to earn LEED points necessarily, but to actually green their portfolio in a way. And we are currently in the process. There's a structural design team within HKS, and we work with them on some projects, but we also work with the bigger firms on other projects. So the awareness about how structure is 75% of your embodied carbon and the first thing to address in your design is growing, and we're definitely looking for more opportunities to do mass timber buildings.
Thank you for peeking to that, right? It's not just operating carbon, it's embodied carbon too, and you're on top of it. Measure where you're at first. Let's do some kind of get to know you questions, if you will. So what would you say, maybe is your specialty or gift?
I think the thing that comes to me most easily, I would say, is writing. And right now, I have about 50 plus publications, including papers and blog posts on green building topics. But a close second, I would say, would be photography. And I did some DIY learning, brought some camera flashes and, equipment. And just every time I need a break from the other stuff, I take my camera out and take pictures.
Man, that's cool. That gets to some of the fun hobbies in a minute. On the writing, any tips? Is there a certain place you love to write? Do you start with pen and paper first, or no, you've got to type it, but do you get out of your normal office? Like, where do you like to write? How do you get in the zone there?
Like I mentioned, it comes so naturally that all of that doesn't matter.
Okay.
And I look at articles I've written 5-10 years ago, and I have no idea where they came from, right? I know they come through me, but the environment and the infrastructure and all that, I would say, is secondary.
Man, what a gift then. You're right. That's not as easy. So thank you for that. So let's take a look next as we get to know each other more. I'm a fan of the bucket list. Are there one or two things maybe on your bucket list you could share? Any travel, adventure? Maybe you want to write a book, another book?
Yes, I actually at some point want to finish writing a fiction novel.
Wow, that's awesome. So is it most of your stuff's technical writing, right? So this would be a new territory for you, maybe.
You never know. The protagonist might end up being a green architect, but there will be a good amount of fiction in there for the twists and turns.
I love that, man. Okay, that's on the bucket list. Any travel or adventure you want to get to one day?
Yeah. At one point, I had a list. I mean, Spain, Thailand, France, and then maybe Costa Rica. There are some places I had, but I guess COVID kind of, flipped the switch on that in a way. So I need to get back to
out there. Yeah. Last week in April coming up is kind of Green Build Europe. It's called the GBCI Europe's Circle event. I spoke last year. I interviewed Peter Templeton. It was amazing on this podcast. So I don't know. You need to get to Barcelona. I'll be there. Maybe check off Spain end of April. Okay.
This coming April.
Yes, sir. I'll listen. Awesome. Let's do it. So that's a bucket list. I think it's important to jot down a few things. Hey, let's go travel, adventure, and you let me know when that fiction book is ready. That's a good segue. You're doing a good job here. Is there a book or a documentary or just a podcast, anything you'd recommend to those listening? It doesn't have to be about green buildings.
I would say I just finished reading Adam Grant's book called Think Again, and I found it extremely inspiring. I think the full title, if I'm remembering it correctly, is Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Do Not Know. And the reason I found it so inspiring is, usually we are in a few modes in our life. We're either a preacher trying to preach our point, or a prosecutor trying to shame the person who doesn't think like us, or a politician who's trying to raise support for our viewpoint. But I think the author urges us to be a scientist who's flexible to the information out there and change your thinking based on the information coming out. So I found that pretty
great recommendation. Well, to our listeners, I'll put a link to the book in the podcast show notes. Thank you for that. Two more questions here. One is, if you look back on your career, is there any career advice you wish you'd have known earlier?
I wish somebody had told me change happens, but it happens more slowly. Because when you're young, energetic, hungry to affect change, become anxious when results don't happen within the expected time frame. But once you spend 10, 15 years in a field and the way things add up and end up in a large outcome that you are not expecting, right? So things have a way of happening. And to quote the Tao Te Ching here, do your work and then step back.
Ooh, that's a good one. Oh, man, I love that. A lot of wisdom on here today. Last question. I love that. Thank you. Let's say someone's listening right now. This green building movement's been good to you. It's been good to me. But let's say someone's listening and they're just now getting involved with green buildings. Maybe they're a professional that's changing careers, or maybe they're a young professional that's excited, passing their LEED exam as they come out of college. Any words of encouragement as they jump in?
Yeah, I would say sign up for volunteering in the causes you care for, and meet as many people as you can, because you never know what perspective you get might change your thinking and set you up in a new direction. And again, be patient. What you want will come to you. It might take slightly longer.
Oof. Thank you. Gosh, it was a pleasure to get to know you more. I know we're here in Atlanta. let me take you up on that lunch soon. And just everyone, I hope you enjoyed listening here to Ramana's story. Connect with him on LinkedIn. And thank you so much for being on today.
I appreciate the opportunity, Charlie. Hi to all your listeners.
Thanks.
I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At GBES.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.